Before we start with this tier list, I just need to clarify two quick things. The first is that this list is created from my humble opinion, from my own experiences and from what I've seen from other people and from what I've read in trip reports. And the second thing I want to clarify is that this tier list, which is a bit of fun, creating a tier list, it is for people who have a genuine intention for peeling away the layers of the onion, for revealing their true inner fragrance, for attaining enlightenment, states of enlightenment, and even bringing that down to sober reality. And the psychedelics mentioned here, the entheogens, they are not to be a be-all, end-all of spiritual tools or spiritual transformation. They are only a small piece of the toolbox you need to be using if you want to be pursuing enlightenment, because psychedelics can be very powerful and helpful for jumping the gap into new states of consciousness, but you need to integrate what you experience with a solid daily practice through sober meditation, and you need to have a really genuine intention of wanting to use these psychedelics in a responsible way for real spiritual development. And if your actual intention is to just have fun, then this tier list is not going to be appropriate for that. So, with those two clarifications out of the way, let's start with the tier list. And we are going to start with the F tier, and perhaps the most frightening, if you read trip reports, substance, which is doTERRA. Now, I've never tried this particular substance, and I don't actually recommend anyone else go searching for it, because doTERRA, I'll put some images on screen, I think that might be interesting, to just give you an idea of what this substance might feel like. doTERRA is well known for creating states where you feel almost like a zombie, because you will very likely go wandering around in public, doing nonsensical things, and you probably won't even have much of a memory of what happened. So there's very limited spiritual benefit that you can get from this substance, but I still include it because some people have had such a positive or true intention of using it for a spiritual purpose, and they've created such a good setting for themselves, making sure that they can't do anything reckless, that they have on some level gone deep into an aspect of their subconscious and had healing there. So it is possible to have healing experiences on doTERRA, but it's quite dangerous because you'll be walking through public. If you read trip reports, it seems extremely unpleasant. It lasts the whole day, and it has side effects for even days afterwards. So as far as entheogens go, it can work if you have really good intentions and you have a really responsible setting set up for yourself. But compared to the other psychedelics, it's just not as appealing. So that's why that is in the F tier. And now in a similar vein, doTERRA sort of lasts all day and makes you feel like a zombie perhaps. But on the other hand, there's another substance called salvia. And salvia, if you smoke it, it lasts a very short amount of time and it is much more powerful. Maybe let's say 5 to 10 minutes, the effects will last. And it is a true psychedelic. doTERRA is not even a psychedelic, but it could be an entheogen if you use it with really good intentions. But salvia is a really strong psychedelic. But unlike many other psychedelics, it does not seem to have aspects of love usually associated with it. And it feels more like you're being pancaked perhaps out of existence. Your ego will get destroyed, which could reveal breakthrough states of consciousness. But the way in which your ego is destroyed for that moment in time, for that period of time, is not pleasant. And if you read trip reports, it doesn't sound appealing at all. So compared to the other substances on this list, it just doesn't compete very well with all those frightening anecdotes. But again, if you do use salvia with a really good intention, then you can perhaps have positive experiences, healing experiences. And I have read that if you use salvia at lower doses, it's not so bad. But I would not recommend anyone go trying and looking for salvia, because there are better substances that you could choose from. Excuse me. And it's for that reason that I have never personally looked for or tried salvia. And now for the last substance on the F tier, it's going to be nicotine. And nicotine is actually a nootropic, so it can help you just have more focus in your meditation, more clarity, perhaps feel more contentment, which are all nice aspects of existence. But the problem with nicotine is that it is too addictive. And if something's addictive, we are not going to be wanting to try it. But if you are smoking already and you do take nicotine, then I do recommend maybe meditating on it and maybe use that extra focus and clarity and contentment to drop smoking or drop nicotine, because any addiction to any drug is ultimately going to be a hindrance. And nicotine is really the example that just snuck through into this tier list, because technically it could help you with focus and clarity, but anything else that's addictive should not be on this list, and that's why hard drugs are not on this list. But there's just one more exception to this non-addictive or to this addictive substance which will made it on the list, and that's alcohol. So that's the first E tier substance we're going to be talking about. And alcohol might seem like a strange one because it's also not very powerful. Just like nicotine, it's more of a subtle effect. It's not as strong as like a really powerful psychedelic. And I don't recommend you go using alcohol as an entheogen because it's really not going to be very effective. It can only give you very minor advantages. And it's addictive and it's harmful to the body. So I don't recommend taking alcohol. Maybe it should even be on the F tier. But the reason I put it on the E tier is because, let's face it, most people, including myself, have drank alcohol in the past and have been drunk in the past or just tipsy. And if you are, then there are some possibilities and potentials that come from being drunk. My limited understanding of alcohol is that it shuts down parts of the brain, and that seems to check out from my experiences. And that can just provide some meditation, introspection opportunities, because maybe the anxious part of you shuts down and then you can see the situation from a different perspective. So just to summarize with alcohol, I would never recommend taking alcohol to meditate, but if you have taken alcohol, then meditation can be a good opportunity to do some introspection. And I remember, if you're drunk and you just find yourself in a room by yourself for 5 minutes, just use that opportunity to do whatever sober spiritual technique that you do. And you don't have to guilt trip yourself if you get tipsy every few months to celebrate. That's fine to celebrate. It's good to celebrate life. And if you are a bit tipsy, use that opportunity to introspect and find out something new about yourself by applying spiritual techniques that you have developed in sober, regular meditation practice. And now, with alcohol out of the way, we're going to move on to a very different substance that's also going to be in the E tier, which is iboga. I've never tried iboga. And again, if you read the trip reports, it doesn't seem pleasant. It doesn't seem nice. The aspects of universal love don't really seem to be there. The vibe seems to be closer to datura maybe, because it's more tribal in nature. There seems to be a lot of harsh themes sometimes that come up. And iboga, just like datura, it lasts the whole day, many, many, many hours. So if you do want to use this substance for spiritual benefit, then you, again, need to have a really genuine desire for having a healing experience from it, and not just to fool around. And also you need to set up a really safe setting for yourself so that you don't physically hurt yourself or get traumatized by being in a situation where there's just traumatic sounds happening. But the reason iboga is not in the F tier is because if you read trip reports, as unpleasant as it sounds, there is definitely a bigger trend that people get something of real worth out of their experience. It's unpleasant, but not wasteful. It seems to bring up some sort of a gem of wisdom or some real healing on a very deep level. And if an experience is not very pleasant, not very nice, but it still provides healing, then it was at the end of the day worth it. But again, compared to other substances that come further on the list, I think there are better options, which is why I've never sought out iboga. I don't intend to look for it, and I've never tried it. So that means a lot. Maybe someone who's tried iboga, all the other substances that I haven't tried on the list so far, like such as datura and salvia, they might disagree with me and want to put it higher up the list. But that's just my perspective. Now moving on to the D tier. This is substances that I would start to recommend people try. You could, if the opportunity comes up and you do have a genuine intention for spiritual transformation and you are intending to use it responsibly, then these substances can be good, but still at the same time they have really significant downsides. So the first of those is MDMA, which most people might be exposed to under the name ecstasy. So the first problem with this substance, though, is that ecstasy is often very impure. It's not pure MDMA, and that can cause bigger hangovers. Also, MDMA, it's more associated with the party scene. A lot of people clubbing are probably on ecstasy. And it does, if you're using it unconsciously, have some negative consequences. You can grind your teeth, for instance. But the real benefit of MDMA is it does bring up warm feelings, let's call it. Feelings of love, but not the grand universal love. Just nice feelings, warm feelings, cozy feelings, like being snuggled up in a warm blanket in winter. Like a cinnamon roll, as a famous character on TV once said. So MDMA brings about lots of warm feelings, and that's why it's often very popular to combine MDMA with other psychedelics, because that usually is a recipe for very pleasant experiences. But MDMA, it does have it's maybe not addictive. I think it is slightly addictive, but more so it just has a very big tolerance build-up. So if you do MDMA today, it's not going to work tomorrow. And from my experiences, maybe I haven't tried pure MDMA. It feels nice. It can help with other psychedelics as a complement, but it doesn't really provide true deep insights like other true psychedelics do. There's a bit of controversy about it, but I wouldn't label MDMA as a psychedelic at all, but more as just a pleasant feel-good drug. And if you take it with another psychedelic or just on its own, definitely there are meditation opportunities available. You might feel like you're more in tune with yourself, with your happy nervous system, and it can be good, but there are some very severe limitations with it. Don't expect it to take you to enlightenment or really breakthrough states of consciousness, and the love you experience from it isn't the grand universal love, at least from my experiences. But now moving on to the second substance on the D tier, which is very good. It has many positive aspects to it, but it has one serious downfall, and that substance is marijuana, which has many names, of course. Many funny names you could call marijuana or cannabis or THC in particular, I suppose. So my personal experience of marijuana is that the problem with it is that I get addicted to it quite easily. So it's not addictive in the way that hard drugs are, but it's just nice to take it, and it feels good, and you do get some seeming benefit from it. So if it's lying around the house, I just found myself taking it every day, or nearly every day, most days of the week. And sometimes I would want to stop taking it, but then soon afterwards I found myself taking it again. Excuse me. So any substance that's really addictive, I wouldn't really want to put high on this list. But at the same time, I really had some really strong spiritual experiences on marijuana. The first big experiences I've ever had at all were on marijuana. And what I used to do was listen to Sadhguru talks, Shinzen Young talks on YouTube. I used to try out meditation exercises on marijuana. One time I remember I had a really big crown opening and there was like huge beams of light coming down, and that was instigated by marijuana. A lot of Indian yogis use marijuana. So definitely, most people who take marijuana have no spiritual intention, or they don't practice at least really strong spiritual techniques. But if you use really solid techniques of meditation when under the influence of marijuana, and you do that regularly, you probably will have very powerful states of consciousness. Even, I don't think marijuana is a true psychedelic. I don't think it will take you to enlightenment. But still, there can be some use. But I would not recommend you go out looking for marijuana, because I've seen it myself and actually many people, many of my friends, I think it is addictive. Many people would disagree with me on that. But just the fact that someone takes it almost every day and they need it to feel calm and relaxed, I think that outweighs all the benefits of it. And there would be an interesting case of weighing the pros against the cons, but there are other substances that are just better than marijuana in every way. So it's best, I think, to drop marijuana and move on to other substances. And again, it's a case of, I wouldn't recommend using marijuana if you want to have spiritual experiences, but if you are already smoking marijuana, use that opportunity to really practice solid spiritual techniques which you hone in sober meditation, and then that can give you real benefits. And ultimately, the deepest insight I had on marijuana was sensing and feeling on a spiritual level, on an archetypal level. I could feel the addiction within me, and then that insight helped me drop marijuana. But anyway, maybe I personalized that one a bit too much. But moving on from marijuana, it's now caffeine that's next on the list. And caffeine might be like a bit of a strange one, because it's not very strong. Actually, all of the items on this D list are not very strong substances compared to what's coming, and even what's gone before. But caffeine I like. I've had some good success with it, and I see many meditators that are quite advanced that do use caffeine at times. Now, caffeine I also think is addictive to some level, actually a very big level, because most people take caffeine every day. And a lot of people will tell you that they're not addicted to caffeine, they don't even feel the effects of caffeine. But if that was so, then they could easily move on to decaf. But if you suggest someone tries decaf coffee in the morning instead of caffeinated, they'll probably laugh at you. So people are really dependent on caffeine to function. But I found if you use caffeine very rarely, maybe once a week, then it can be almost a really good substitute for alcohol, because if your body's not used to caffeine, it can really get a hit and a wakeness, because caffeine is, in my experience, it's the most effective nootropic, which is to say it provides clarity and focus in the mind, and it energizes my nervous system. For me, it's not very strong, but it's still noticeable. And if you combine your meditation and spiritual practices with something physical, for instance, dancing, then caffeine can just provide you with a bit of a hit. And caffeine can also be very useful for other situations, such as if you're meditating late at night, it can help you stay awake. If you're meditating in the morning, it can help you wake up. But the big caveat is, don't take it every day. Limit yourself to once or twice a week, because the more you do it, the less of an effect it has. If you do it rarely, it's going to be a much more noticeable, happy effect than if you do it regularly. But ultimately, I think caffeine is a good tool if you use it properly, but it's not very powerful. It's a more subtle effect, so it can't go much higher on the list than the D tier. Now, we're going to go on to the C tier now, and this is the big controversial one that probably many people, probably most people, the vast majority of people who have tried this substance will disagree with me and say this should be higher up on the tier. And this is the only item that I'm putting in the C tier, and this substance is NN-DMT, what most people simply refer to as DMT. So this substance is extremely powerful. it tends to result, if you take it, into breakthrough states of consciousness, breakthrough states of love. It can provide states of enlightenment. It's really a very powerful substance. Compared to something like marijuana or MDMA or alcohol, it's, you could say, 1,000 times more strong. And it provides aspects of universal love, not warm, cozy love, just universal, profound love. But the reason I'm putting it on the C tier and not higher is ultimately for two reasons. The first is that it's got a competitor. NN-DMT is great, but there's another substance which is quite similar, but which doesn't have any of the downsides of DMT. And that brings us on to the second point, which is the downsides of DMT, which again is twofold. The first downside, which is more minor, is that DMT is a very, very visual substance, which can be good and bad. But in my own personal experiences, DMT, the visuals associated with it seem to be almost distracting, because if you see all sorts of, something that's commonly seen on DMT is gestures, or like gestures. I hope you know what a gesture is. Or machine elves, lots of little creatures, and it seems to be quite strange. The first time I tried DMT, I saw all sorts of faces moving around in the trees. It's all nice. There's nothing wrong with the visuals, but the visuals themselves don't seem to be very useful, and it can be distracting. So that's the first downside of DMT. And the second downside is that the vast majority of people smoke DMT. And in my own personal experience, smoking DMT is harsh on my lungs, and the body senses that it's unhealthy, and because of that, mine closed down. It wasn't so open to accepting the substance because it felt yucky, sticky, just a bit unhealthy. And again, there would be an interesting pros and cons weighing up of DMT, normal NN-DMT. Do the pros outweigh the cons? But in this case, there's an alternative substance, which is coming up later in the list, that is even more powerful than normal DMT. You don't have to smoke it. It doesn't have nearly as much visuals, so it just seems to be better in every way. So I would put DMT higher up on the tier list, usually because it's a short burst of breakthrough levels of consciousness. But just because there's a competitor that's better in almost every way, that's why it's down at C. But I would totally recommend at this point DMT. If you have access to it and you have sincere, genuine spiritual intentions, then DMT can change your life. It can provide insights that there is really, this whole spirituality thing is not abstract. It is abstract, but it's not so subtle. It's not philosophy or just ideas. It's really profound, huge spaces of consciousness that are just below the surface of perception. So if you can't find other psychedelics and you really want to experience enlightenment for yourself, then DMT can take you there. DMT has shown many people breakthrough states of consciousness. And so at this point, I would start recommending that you look for and try DMT if you feel like you are responsible enough and stable enough to try such a profound experience. Okay, so that's the most controversial, probably, substance on the list taken care of. And now let's move on to the B tier. Now, the B tier, all of these have something in common. These substances are not the most powerful, but they all last very long, by which I mean they last around 8 to 12 or 16 hours. These sort of things have a peak and then a long tail. But you can get useful spiritual insights or have a useful journey on them for the whole day. And that's why I'm putting them so high at the B tier. It's not that you will probably have profound, huge breakthrough states of consciousness. But if you're a real spiritual seeker and you are already doing whole day meditations, so literally you set up camp somewhere, maybe in the woods, in a nice little hut, and you are going to be sitting down meditating all day. Or in my case, what I've tried in the past is meditating all night, doing an all-night sit. Because all-night sits can be very interesting because your brain chemistry changes at night time. And all of these substances that are on the B tier, they last a really long time. So although they're not the strongest at normal doses, they have a very specific use, and they're very useful if you use them in the correct setting for long meditation sits. So the first of these substances is LSD, which is probably the most popular psychedelic in the whole world. LSD can provide really interesting states of consciousness. In general, it's a bit dangerous, I think, LSD, because it lasts so long and because people tend to combine it with partying. And a lot of people end up driving a car in LSD because they're somewhere and they, you're not feeling like yourself. Maybe you feel unsafe and you feel like you need to get out of an area, so you get in a car and drive. But that's very, very dangerous. If you are going to be taking LSD, please make sure that you're in a safe setting where you don't and won't drive and where you won't do something too silly. But again, this tier list is for people with genuine, responsible spiritual intentions. And LSD, at least in my experience, if you're doing an all-day sit or all-night sit, can be very useful. It's useful for a few reasons. One is that it can loosen up the nervous system to exploring new areas. In general, people agree that LSD helps the brain connect more within itself, and it also helps keep you awake. The downside is that at the end of the LSD trip, you probably will feel more groggy, and it's not the be-all end-all, but I think it's definitely worth it for anyone who meditates for 8 to 12 hours in a day to try it at least once or twice on LSD, because you will probably have very big, tangible, positive healing experiences from that. Okay, so LSD, that's out of the way. Now we're moving on to a somewhat similar substance, which is mescaline. Now, I have tried mescaline twice, but neither of those doses were very strong. But what I liked about it is that it's similar to LSD in that it lasts a very long time, but again, it's less visual. So because there's less visuals, it's less distracting. And to me, it felt a bit more clean, a bit less like poison, and my body sort of accepted it more easily than LSD. But again, that could be more of a purity question rather than an actual substance question. So I can't talk too much about mescaline, but it's similar to LSD in that it lasts a long time. It does open up the nervous system. But I encourage you to read people's trip reports on mescaline. And I, again, see a very solid use for it if you're going to be meditating all day or all night, to be taking a substance such as mescaline at least once or twice. And now the third item on the B list, which I'm the most tentative about because I've never tried this substance and it's so popular. People who try it almost always rave about how great it is, about how it changed their life. So perhaps it should be higher than the B tier, but I've never had the opportunity to try it, so I can't really put it higher than this. But it may very well be even more impactful than I state here. And that is ayahuasca, because ayahuasca also lasts a very long time, but it's seemingly, from what I've read, much more powerful than LSD and mescaline. It basically takes you to a breakthrough state of consciousness and keeps you there for many, many hours if you take the right dose. It does seem to have some downsides in terms of discomfort, because a lot of people find it uncomfortable. There's oftentimes vomiting or purging involved. But overall, I wish I could say more about it, but I haven't tried it. Ayahuasca does seem to transform people's lives in a way that they perceive is for the better. Now, with that, the B tier done, now we're moving on to the A tier. There's only one item in the A tier, and this is the highest psychedelic that I have on the list that most people would probably have heard of, which is magic mushrooms. And the reason I really like magic mushrooms so much compared to, for instance, LSD is its duration time. It lasts, a few hours. LSD lasts the whole day, but magic mushrooms, it has a peak and a longish tail, but I would say between 3 to 5 hours, you're going to get really strong effects. And because it's relatively short, you can sit down in meditation and really have a huge, profound experience. And you can take a dose that's big enough that you have an actual breakthrough level, breakthrough state of consciousness. And the duration of 3 to 5 hours is really perfect, because something like normal DMT that only lasts 5 to 10 minutes, it's very profound and still useful, but there's less time to integrate what you're experiencing. And if you want to use spiritual techniques such as a mantra or breathing exercises or affirmations or focus exercises or self-inquiry, there's many spiritual exercises that are wonderful to try on a psychedelic if you have the time. But DMT is a bit quick and so much is happening at once that you can't you really use your skillful means in meditation. Whereas magic mushrooms, you can use all that skill in a really at a strong dose, but it doesn't last so long that it's going to be uncomfortable and logistically hard. So yeah, some of the most profound states of consciousness and transformation that I've had were on magic mushrooms. Magic mushrooms are quite commonly available. It's something that most people can get a hold of. And you can, if you're lucky, even find them in the wild. You could potentially even grow your own if you can do so in your local territory or your local state. It's a very natural substance as well, because some substances like LSD or MDMA, there's a question of purity and what are you actually getting. But if you get a magic mushroom, it's just a pure mushroom. You know what you're getting. And magic mushroom seems to have more of a theme of nature. Sometimes positive, sometimes dark. For instance, me, I have oftentimes had squid-like energies or octopus-like energies, visuals, sort of symbolizing perhaps, or archetypally representing the ego and how the ego functions. But it seems to have more of a deep, natural, cosmic intelligence and wisdom to offer you than LSD, which is interesting, but maybe that's because LSD has only been around for, dozens of years, whereas magic mushrooms and psilocybin have been around for, millions of years. So yeah, my favorite personal entheogen that most people would have heard of is magic mushrooms. It's a great duration, but you can take a big enough dose or small dose, but you can take a really big dose to have breakthrough states of consciousness and use that 3 to 5 hours to really integrate and use spiritual techniques. And you can blow your heart open. You can experience cosmic love with it and hopefully bring some of that down to daily consciousness, sober reality, so that you can better serve your fellow conscious beings. But now that's the A tier done. Now we're moving on to the last substance, which is in the S tier, and that's 5-MeO-DMT. In years of late, this has become more and more popular. And indeed, this is NN-DMT, normal DMT's biggest competitor. And 5-MeO-DMT has many distinct big advantages over NN-DMT. The first of which is that, I've sort of already covered these, but you don't have to smoke it. There are other routes of administration. And these other routes of administration, they last longer. Maybe 20 to 40 minutes can be your experience, which again gives you more time to integrate what's happening. And it gives you time to maybe try a spiritual technique or two. And because you don't have to smoke it, it's just healthier on the body. But also compared to normal DMT, it's simply stronger, or it's easier to get a strong hit, because if you're smoking DMT, there's coughing involved and you physically have to get a lot of smoke into the lungs, Whereas a 5-MeO-DMT and its route of administration, its preferred routes of administration, there's a few you can pick from, but in particular there's one that's really good that I will link down in the description. If you use that technique, you can really dose very high or very accurately smaller doses. You can use it at really low doses to just have slightly spiritual experience, or you can ramp it up all the way to guaranteeing you will have an enlightenment experience. The substance is very clean. There's very few visuals involved. There are some, but it's not nearly as distracting. The insights as well, they seem to be very profound and stick with you more. They stick with the nervous system, and they give you a topic to integrate for probably a few weeks. If you have a big dose of 5-MeO-DMT, it would be very wise to integrate everything for 1 or 2 weeks at least, which contrasts to marijuana, for instance, because I've had many... at the time, it felt like a really profound insight on marijuana, but then on the next day or so, it just peters out. Whereas 5-MeO-DMT, it doesn't peter out. The insights are very deep. There are vast themes of universal love. If there's one theme that comes up, for me at least, with 5-MeO-DMT, it's love. Love and God, like the most profound states of consciousness that I've ever had, come from this substance. I shouldn't ramble on about it too much. It's definitely my favorite. There are perhaps other substances that are just as potent, just as useful, more designer drugs. I've heard of a few candidates, but I've never tried them, so I won't mention them here. But if you're really interested in spirituality and you are searching for a substance that you want to use to have breakthrough levels of consciousness, to expand your mind, to experience God, to experience enlightenment and love, and to bring that down to sober reality, I would recommend 5-MeO-DMT. One downside is that it's not the easiest substance to get a hold of because it's not so popular. If you do use it, I recommend finding the pure version of it, not the toad version, the bufotane, I believe it's called, version, the bufo version. Find the pure version. Read more about it. This is just a tier list video. Maybe in the future I'll make a video specifically for why 5-MeO-DMT is so great compared to other psychedelics. But most people, I would say, if not almost all, that have really strong spiritual intentions, genuine intentions, and want to use a psychedelic responsibly for experiencing the deepest parts of existence genuinely for themselves, people who have tried 5-MeO-DMT, they tend to love it. They tend to stick with it. It's not addictive at all. The experiences are so strong that you're tentative to go and to have it, to take the substance, because with experience, you only take it if you know you're going to have a week ahead that's going to be calm enough for you to integrate what's happening. There's really no way of describing how profound the states on 5-MeO-DMT are. The word God and universal love is the closest you could come to describing what you can experience. But again, I don't want to give the false impression that 5-MeO-DMT is the be-all, end-all, and a literal magic pill to enlightenment. It can be a magic pill to experience profound states of consciousness, but that's not the end of the story. If you want to move into permanent states of enlightenment and universal love and breakthrough consciousness, then you need to introduce daily meditation practices. And in that sense, if you use 5-MeO-DMT as a small piece of your meditation toolkit, it can help open up new spaces. And in my experience anyway, once you open a space inside your mind or outside your mind through 5-MeO-DMT, then you can more easily access it in sober meditation going on into the future. And because these psychedelics probably neurologically affect the brain and the connections between the brain, if you use it with consciousness, you can access these states again afterwards through sober meditation. And if you use spiritual techniques in particular, I need to say here that if you're going to do this, proceed with caution. But if you do a basic mantra, for instance, then the mantra can be so powerful during the trip that it will be unbelievable to you how powerful it is. But then if you use it in sober reality, the resonance of that powerful experience can continue. So yeah, that's my S tier item, 5-MeO-DMT. But if you've tried these substances, or if you think I've missed any out, I would welcome anyone to give me their tier lists. Let me know what you think. Have I misplaced any items? Have I made any mistakes? It'd be nice to just hear a more wider perspective of what everyone has to say. And this is just my humble opinion. But I just want to finish by closing that saying that if you already have a spiritual intention and you want to undertake this journey of using entheogens for self-transformation, maybe you're a bit frustrated at sober meditation only because you're meditating, you have a really solid practice, you're doing whatever technique that you're doing. I don't want to specify anything in particular because I don't want to insult any practices. But some practices, they're really solid, really good, but you're not getting the breakthroughs that you want. And if you want those really deep, profound breakthroughs and experience everything you read about, such as enlightenment and breakthrough love, for yourself, you 100% can experience those things by using an entheogen. And if you're a stable person, you don't have any mental issues, and a genuine desire for enlightenment, I would recommend, if you're going to search out for an entheogen, then use magic mushrooms, 5-MeO-DMT, and maybe LSD, mescaline, ayahuasca as well. But the top 3 tiers of this list is what I would recommend. That's just my humble opinion.